Donald Trump came to the mountain this week and met with the Republican power brokers, the ones who believe they are in charge of what happens at the convention. Some would find it hard to fathom Donald Trump did not use this opportunity to tell them whom he believes is really in charge. But it comes at a precarious time for the leading Republican nominee. His numbers are slipping. A number of the vaunted polls have turned against him. And for the first time ever, Trump has admitted he may have made a mistake. We are indeed at a turning point with Wisconsin in the windshield. That heads-up display must also see the resurgence of a looming nuclear threat, and not just linked to Trump's call for the possible use of nukes on European soil. This time it revolves around underestimating the possibility ISIS wants and may soon acquire weapons-grade material. The NFL picked the wrong fight this week, the connection between autism and prodigies and the political punching bag. I'm Ed Berliner. It's all next on the Friday, April 1st, no-joke edition of The Hardline.
In symbolic terms, they both had a reason to have this meeting. For Donald Trump, he said it was a unifying meeting. He's had a kind of a rough week, and so he's in Washington. He met with his foreign policy leaders today. He met with the Republican Party, and he's saying, I'm a unifier. I'm not a chaotic candidate. For the Republican Party, even though there are some in the Republican Party who want to deny Donald Trump the nomination, the committee has to show that it's treating him fairly all the way along, that the process is fair. So they met for an hour. They talked about the delegate allocation process and informed Trump of some things he didn't know, that there's a process beyond just getting delegates from the votes.
At first glance, it's just another story discussing what may or may not happen at the Republican National Convention, featuring an unnamed individual making a statement about where the vote might be going. But look into it just a bit closer, and we have another indicator as to an element of this election few seem willing to focus on. One group of people who could now hold the GOP's fate in their hands, indicating a much bigger problem for the frontrunner than he likely ever expected. Do not fear the truth and question everything. Let's get to work. She is Director of Health Policy at the Independent Women's Forum, where they seek limited constitutional government, Hadley Heath Manning. And we're joined by the senior writer for the Weekly Standard, Mark Hemingway. I want to thank you both for being here. No jokes coming up in the next 10 minutes, so let's go ahead and get started. Hadley Heath, let me begin with you. The article I talk about is in Politico, titled, Delegates Ready to Flee Trump at Contested Convention. If you go into the article, it says out of the 168 Republican National Committee members, each of whom doubles as a convention delegate, only one publicly supports Trump, and she knows of only a handful of others who support him privately. I'm going to back that up with a Gallup poll that says 7 in 10 women have unfavorable opinion of Trump. Look, whether you love him, loathe him, it makes no difference. Let's go from fact here, Hadley Heath. This has to be troubling to the Trump campaign. They are seeing a crack here in what has been a dominating run thus far. If they don't win women, let's be honest, they can lose this election.
Right, and winning the women's vote is even more critical in a general election where women comprise about 53% of the voting public. Women showed up to be about 48% of voters in the early primaries on the Republican side. So that might sound like a difference of a few percentage points, but we're talking about the difference in winning the White House or not winning the White House in many cases. Republicans have struggled to win the women's vote over the past several presidential years. President Obama won by 13 and 11 percentage points over various Republican foes to maintain the White House for 8 years. So it's absolutely critical that Republicans, if they want to win the White House, nominate someone who can appeal to women voters. And if you look at the past week that Trump has had between Heidi Cruz, his campaign manager's arrest, and also his comments on abortion, he's digging an even deeper hole with those women voters.
Then in 30 seconds, succinctly then, look Donald Trump and his followers in the eye and, in your opinion, tell them what he must do in order to get the women vote back.
He must recognize that all issues are women's issues and lay out a broad agenda that includes both cultural and economic issues. Explain to women voters why having him in the White House would benefit them, would keep us safer, stronger, and economically more vibrant as a country.
Mark, here's another issue here. Donald Trump rarely backs up on anything, but after his MSNBC interview this week and the comments about abortion, he says now he may have misspoke about abortion. Is it not? And boy, we get a lot of heat from this, people saying that he doesn't have to apologize for anything. But when you play the political game, don't you have to start backing up a little bit and basically saying, look, I got it wrong. That makes nice with the voters, yes?
I would think so. I mean, there's nothing wrong with admitting when you get something, wrong. And even in this case, Trump, if you read his initial statement on the matter, he began with the sentence, "My position has not changed," which, it wasn't true. I mean, previously we had an issue where he held 3 different positions on H-1B visas in one day based on his comments from the debate stage. And at some point, you're just undermining your own credibility when you're all over the map on these policy issues that you're speaking about that you apparently don't understand, you haven't done the homework on, and you're refusing to admit that you made a mistake or you've done something that's damaging to your campaign.
Do you think, though, it is smart, though, that he met with Reince Priebus and the RNC, they got together, and apparently, Mark, they've shaken hands here, they've played nice at this point. Do you get the sense that maybe this is the last time we are ever going to hear this, I may go somewhere else and I'm not treated fair, or is it just another chapter?
I think it's just another chapter. If there's one thing we can say predictably about Donald Trump, it's that he's unpredictable. He does what he wants to do, and he says what he wants to say, and there's not much that anyone can do to change his mind on that. But more to the point here, if Trump is at all serious about winning, he has to learn how to actually deal with the Republican Party and its rules and its traditions and its, and the people that have been traditional voters in this party. And he's done a very poor job of that thus far. We saw a good example of that down in Louisiana, where even though Trump, narrowly won the election in the state, Ted Cruz went down there and just by virtue of understanding and exploiting the party rules, somehow netted 10 more delegates out of the state. Trump has thus far shown no interest in the Republican Party as an institution or how it works on both the state and national level. And he's got
why should he? I mean, Mark, and I'll tell you what, let me go to Hadley Heath on this one. Why should he? I mean, at this point, he has basically broken every rule. He has not done what anybody tells him to do. He's not done what Reince Priebus tells him to do. And he's leading still in the polls, still as far as the delegate count is. So, Hadley Heath, why should he change now?
Well, if he doesn't reach the critical number of delegates, 1237, before the convention, he'll be headed to a convention where he may try to break rules, but the rules are set and governed by RNC party officials. They can change the rules. There are rules that allow for votes beyond that initial vote, where delegates can change their preference in terms of candidate. And that's ultimately the nomination process. And if he wants to be the nominee, he has to go through that process if he doesn't show up with the 1237 delegates he needs.
Now, the process has everybody heading for Wisconsin. The current average for the Wisconsin polls, according to Real Clear Politics, has Donald Trump trailing Ted Cruz by 4. Mark, I come back to you. Some people have said, we'll hold our nose and we will vote for Ted Cruz even though we don't like him at this point. You go for that and think that will then not just go Wisconsin, but do you think that if Ted Cruz did win Wisconsin, that would follow him into New York and other places?
Oh, I think that there's no question already. We're seeing an environment here where Trump is starting to, peak a little in terms of the national interest. He's gotten the tremendous amount of media coverage in the last couple of weeks, as he always has, but so much of that has been negative relating to his attacks on Ted Cruz's wife and other things like that. And not only that, it's not just that he's, Cruz is besting him in Wisconsin. The momentum is completely moving toward Cruz. The last 2 big polls in the state, PPP and the Marquette University, showed Cruz up 10, and he's been consistently, expanding his lead. I just think that, looking forward, it may be very difficult for Ted Cruz to get to the magic number. He's got to get something like 80% of the remaining delegates to win the nomination outright.
But would you agree at this point, though? Would you agree at this point, though, that while Ted Cruz might do well in Wisconsin, he's got no chance in New York? That's a Donald Trump state. That
might be, but if you look at the total picture there, by the same token, if it's going to be very difficult for Ted Cruz to win outright, it's going to be very difficult for Donald Trump as well to get to the magic number of 1,237 delegates and win the nomination outright. That is looking like an increasingly less likely scenario by the minute. And so then the broker convention and all the rules and stuff that I was talking about earlier come into relief, and he's going to have to address that head on.
We have not mentioned the third gentleman here for the Republican nominee possibilities, John Kasich. Now, a pro-John Kasich super PAC put out an anti-Ted Cruz ad. We warn everybody here, once you've seen this, it's clean, don't worry about it, but once you've seen it, you can really never unsee it. Here it comes.
Many just call him Lyin' Ted. Lied about Ben Carson to steal a win in Iowa. Lies about being the best for the GOP when polls show he can't even beat Hillary Clinton. His TV ad about John Kasich? Lie. Stations had to pull it off the air. If Ted Cruz's mouth is moving, he's lying.
Lawsuits from Pinocchio soon to come. Hadley Heath, the interesting thing is here, John Kasich came right and he said, look, stop. I'm very unhappy with this. This is not what we want to do. It's the first time we've really heard somebody come out and speak against a super PAC. Doesn't that tell us again what we've been saying now for weeks? These super PACs, they act on their own. The candidates don't have control over them, but it is the right thing to do for John Kasich to say something, yes?
Right, and we ran into a similar problem with a super PAC that attacked Melania Trump, and then, of course, the Trump camp responded by blaming Ted Cruz when, in fact, it was an independent super PAC that ran the initial ad about Mrs. Trump. So this is a cycle or a trend that we see with super PACs. They're not necessarily working in cahoots with the campaigns of various candidates. But what's truly remarkable about Wisconsin is that Ted Cruz is leading Trump in spite of the fact that John Kasich is in the race there, also maintaining a significant portion of voters to himself. And so we've been saying this whole time that once the Republican field got narrower and narrower, we would see a coalescing behind an anti-Trump candidate. In this case, it turns out to be Ted Cruz, although he's not the favorite of a lot of Republicans who previously supported Marco Rubio or Ben Carson or Carly Fiorina or whomever. Those Republicans are now turning to Ted Cruz, and that's why we see him with a lead. But John Kasich remains in the race as well.
Quick to you, 20 seconds, Mark. Doesn't this tell us don't pay attention to the super PAC ads because a lot of times they have no basis in fact?
Well, that's part of it, but you do wonder how much actual coordination is going on behind the scenes. You know that there's some. But, having said that, I mean, this is just John Kasich just should be glad that people are talking about him at all at this point. It's mathematically impossible for him to win the nomination.
Look out, you brought up conspiracies. You would have to end on that note, wouldn't you? Mark Hemingway, Hadley Heath Manning, a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great weekend. Once the vehicle for dramatic movies, it's more likely now than ever before a dirty bomb could wind up in the hands of terrorists. We're going to talk about it next, coming up here on The Hardline.